Their backgrounds. Ann McLean Kuster has served at the New Hampshire 2nd District since 2013. She currently serves on the House Veterans Affairs Committee and is co-chair and co-founder of two really important bipartisan task forces. One to end the heroin epidemic, and the other to end sexual violence. Prior to serving us in Congress, Annie served as a longtime community activist and an adoption attorney. And so, thank you for your service. Congressman Peter Welch has served the citizens of Vermont in the U.S. House since 2006. But prior to that, represented us in the Vermont Senate, actually serving as the President Pro Tem of the Senate. Representative Welch currently sits on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And he lives right across the river in one of the co-signatories to the Dresden Compact in Norwich. And so welcome, Representative Welch. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn over the floor to our representatives.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the first Dresden School District, the first interstate school district. One of the best, I would say. So this is a real treat for me to be here tonight with Peter Welch. I'm just going to say a couple of words and turn it over to Peter, who is my senior, not probably in age, but in experience. He was my mentor when I came to Congress, and he's become a very dear friend, and I want to welcome Margaret for being with us as well. I'm delighted. We're doing a series of town halls all over my district. We were down in Nashua, we've been up in Berlin, over here in Hanover, and getting around, making sure that we stay on top of all the issues that are on your mind, and that we get a chance to report back on what we're doing on your behalf. So I'm going to just turn it over to Peter. Just one thing to add to the bio: I'm on the Agriculture Committee and also the Veterans Affairs Committee, and thank you for mentioning the two task forces, spending a lot of time on opioids, and then most recently this new task force on sexual violence. And both of those are very bipartisan. The opioid task force has 100 members, 50 R's, 50 D's. And I can tell you there are not very many issues on Capitol Hill where you can get that kind of, sadly enough, I always say the heroin doesn't choose R's and D's, so we've got to work together. And on the sexual violence one, it's men and women, Republican and Democrat. My co-chair, Jackie Spear from California, and then two Republican co-chairs, Patrick Meehan from Pennsylvania and Dave Joyce from Ohio. They both have extensive experience. Pat was a U.S. attorney and prosecuted rape cases. And so as we go along, I'll make sure to fill you in on a little bit more about that. But I'm going to turn over to Peter, and we'll open it up to the floor.
Thank you. Annie Kuster has a problem that is not usually one that politicians have. She's way too modest. I'm telling you something you don't know. She is a great representative, is doing a fantastic job. Those caucuses that she started to get people to work together, that's like so essential. And she has been a tremendous partner for me. It's been a pleasure to work with you, Annie, and you're doing a great job. She enjoys a fantastic reputation. So congratulations to New Hampshire, and we on the Vermont side get the benefit of Annie's leadership. Thank you. I also want to thank Ann Silverfart, our good friend from Norwich, who works with the other folks in the Upper Valley Indivisible, and it was their suggestion that we have this meeting. And Annie and I were delighted to do it together. I was saying to the Burlings, we're living in a time where any demonstration of mutual cooperation is like so appreciated by people. And you know, people, it is. And I are committed to that. The third thing I want to say is, Margaret, how's the school look? Margaret was the chair of the Dresden board when they were doing the expansion.
The building of the school, the renovation of the high school, and building the playing field.
That's right. and they had to negotiate with Dartmouth College, and it was before President Hanlon was here, so Margaret claims she got a really good deal for the taxpayers. So don't reopen, okay? The next thing I want to say is, you're here because, and you're rightfully here, it's very serious what is facing our country now. It's just different. It's not the normal situations where our side, my side, or your side lost an election. What's been thrown into doubt with the way we're operating is the basic application of norms of behavior, basic issue of respect for the law, basic commitment to the endurance of our institutions that are absolutely essential to carry on values that we have. And you know, it's interesting, I am in Vermont, and we've had a tradition of very progressive Vermont Republicans. Annie's family is just embedded in the proud tradition of New Hampshire Republicans. We're both Democrats, but we come out of a political tradition where you work together and where fundamental decisions about the importance of building institutions, it can be the local bank, it can be the local college, it can be the local volunteer fire department, where whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, you had a sense of humility that, yes, the values that you held dear and you would fight for, if they were going to be carried on, they actually had to have a place in institutions to help carry them on. And that is what I see as being threatened in Washington right now, the disrespect for institutions. When I see what's happening to the State Department, it's unraveling, just not funding it, or the Education Department, where it's not just about trying to have tough discussions about hard issues in education and how we do it, but a real challenge to the basic proposition of education. Or, of course, the mother of all bad situations, the environment, where we are denying science, where that's actually happening, as opposed to having the confidence to face science, to face challenges. That is what is different than anything I've experienced in my adult life and certainly in my political life. And it's why when people ask me, I'm considered to be a liberal progressive Democrat. But you know what? The issue for me is making that institution function. It's not who has got it exactly right or wrong. Now, the last thing I want to say to get this started is there's a reason Donald Trump got elected, and there's a reason that Bernie Sanders did so well. There's a lot of pain in this country from the dislocation of people's sense of confidence in their ability to pay their bills, to take care of their family. And it's not just trade deals. It's a whole lot of things. It's technology. It's how workers in rural America are being displaced. It's about the information economy. It's about disinvestment. And those are hard challenges. And I think, frankly, Democrats have to accept that we've got to do better than what we've been doing. And we've got to be all in on acknowledging the real urgency of that challenge and face that problem, and people will go with us. But those are tough challenges. But the answer is not closing our borders. The answer is not telling 800,000 people who've been brought here by their parents when they're kids, they've got to go back to a country they don't even know. And I want to thank President Hanlon, and I want to thank all the educators, our President Sullivan at the University of Vermont for standing up for those DACA folks. That is about basic fairness and what it is, in my view, to be an American. So these are dire times. It is an enormous challenge, and Annie and I take it very, very seriously. But what's happening in the intervening time is that leadership is really emerging at the local level. So things like indivisible, it's really important. And you might not be able to see the benefit of your work immediately, but the work that you're doing is essential. Well, Annie and I try to get us back on track where we should be in Washington. The final thing I want to say, and then I'll open it up, is there's a kind of cynicism with the Trump agenda. The president identified pain that people have, and that's real. But the solutions of closing borders, the solutions of vilifying Muslims, that is not a solution. And there's a cynicism that I'm seeing where the policies that they're advocating, starting with taking away health care from 32 million people, is just totally an attack on a lot of the people whose hopes and dreams, even in voting for that candidate, was for a better economy. And one example that just highlights it for me right now You see the story about Secretary Price of the Health and Human Services, who took a $25,000 private jet to Philadelphia because it left 3 minutes before the $427 commercial flight, or the $72 Amtrak flight. $60,000 in private planes in 3 days. That you can't do unless you have a disregard for the people that you claim that you're representing. You can't do that. The secretaries of the HHS and the Bush administration and the Clinton administration and the Obama administration wouldn't have dreamed of doing that. And Secretary Price did. In my view, that was for his convenience, not for the benefit of taxpayers. He should pay back to the taxpayers every single dollar of that rip-off travel that he took. Thank
you, Peter, for getting us started. I just wanted to make one announcement, just so that people understand. This event, this town hall, is under the auspices of our official offices. So we'll be talking about policy and issues. That's all right, we let you get away with a minor slip. But going forward, if you do want to discuss a political issue, I'd be happy to do that with you offline. I know Peter would. You can be in touch with us, kusterforcongress.com. You can be in touch with Peter, something Welch, something. And we do have staff in the back of the room. If you have particular issues, we're happy. You can bring them up if you want to use them as an example. But if you get too far in the weeds, I'm going to ask you to meet with my staff. We can handle things as a casework. We can help you with your specific issue around the Veterans Affairs or your Social Security check or immigration or whatever it might be. So those are our only ground rules, and we'll start right in. Are there any questions? Don't be shy. I think we're talking about that, so definitely feel free to talk about the political climate that we're in.
Thank you. Peter, this is for you. There was a terrific opinion piece by and I'm not going to be able to quote it, I'm thinking of speak, but about the Oversight Committee. And the comment was, I am a Republican. I have been on this committee for however long you've been on it, I don't know his name, but he said, and we were all over everything that Barack Obama was doing. We were pointing out this, we were pointing out that, we were taking him to task, and now I'm looking at this Republican group. They're not saying a word. Is that your perception, and what can be done?
Well, things are different.
Yeah.
Is this on?
No.
Yes. Number one, the way it works in the House is that the majority does rule. And the majority has an ironclad control over whether there will be a hearing or there won't be. Okay? So when the Oversight Committee they were really going after Hillary, as you noticed, the Benghazi hearing and everything else. In the ideal world, the Oversight Committee is going after things that need to be reviewed about government spending. Like, for instance, it'd be a legitimate question for the Oversight Committee to take a look at this travel that's occurring and should we be spending that much travel or that much money on a trip to Philadelphia, 25 grand, all right? I mean, that's a good question. So this is the challenge we face because it does get locked in the kind of partisanship that is really, really upsetting people. And this is interesting to me, by the way. Vermont voted very strongly, of course, for Hillary Clinton. But the thing that I hear from Vermonters more than anything, even though they didn't vote for Trump, it's not a criticism about President Trump. It's about, Peter, why don't you guys get together and get something done? That's what I'm hearing the most, Andy.
No, I would definitely agree. I mean, the one irony I would say is it was Secretary Price in his position in the Congress who had the biggest complaints, particularly about overspending. There's a little irony there. But no, I totally agree with Peter. And one of the things that Peter and I were just involved with actually had to do with healthcare. I had voted 55 times not to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And meanwhile, these bills kept coming over the last couple of months, and they were getting meaner and meaner and worse, more and more people losing their health insurance coverage. In New Hampshire, for example, we have 110,000 more people who have health insurance coverage under the Affordable Care Act, and that's both our Medicaid expansion. 50,000 people never had access to health care. We have another 50,000 people on the exchange, and then we have 10,000 young people under age 26. And Peter and I are among a group of Democrats who believe that we want to keep the Affordable Care Act, but we need to repair it. We need to make some fixes. And in particular with regard to the individual market. And even though that's a small percentage, 6%, it's the one that causes the most headaches, and particularly where you have a great deal of small businesses. 90% of the jobs in New Hampshire are small business. People have to pay their own way, and the rates were very high. So Peter and I sat down and worked with a small group of people, and we can get into the details, but it was to stabilize. And then we reached out to Republicans, and we had meetings with Republicans. And frankly, I think that there would be 218 votes to get this done in the House. Patty Murray and Lamar Alexander were working on a similar proposal in the Senate, and there would be a majority in the Senate. In fact, I venture to say they'd get pretty close to 60 votes in the Senate. But right this moment, we're in this hyper-partisan last gasp with the Graham bill that they brought forward, Graham and Cassidy. They claim they're going to vote next week, and it's critically important. And it's not only not bipartisan, it won't have a single vote in the House or the Senate, but it will be devastating. And I would say here in New Hampshire, tens of thousands of people will lose their coverage, and it will impact, I dare say, every hospital in the state. Small hospitals in my district will come close to closing from losing this Medicaid expansion. The burden of the opioid epidemic will be felt throughout the state. I was just yesterday in a meeting with after-school programs and early childhood educators, because there are so many young people in my state now that are living with grandparents. Their parents are either in treatment or incarcerated. So this is a devastating epidemic, and we have an answer that works, and we have bipartisan solutions that will stabilize and fix that for years to come. And yet we've got to fight our way through one more week until the 30th of September, when after that date, they'll need more than 50 votes. So bipartisanship is the way to go, but we have to be ready to fight and then look for an agreement and then fight again and then look for another agreement.
I'm Barbarina Heyerdahl. I'm from Vermont, across the Connecticut to see you guys. My question has to do with the president's speech at the UN a few days ago, in which he is frankly threatening genocide on the Korean Peninsula. And as two progressive Democrats, members of the US Congress, I'm curious as to what you're going to do to prevent that from happening. I cut my teeth as a citizen activist in the anti-nuke movement back in the 70s and went to weeks of teach-ins. There is no tactical nuclear war. There is no containment. This is an incredibly frightening moment. And so I have two specific questions. One, my understanding of the War Powers Act is that technically no military action can be taken without the permission of the Congress. So as members of the opposition party, what are you going to do about that? And the second is, I understand legislation has been introduced, I don't remember the specific number, but addresses the fact that during the Cold War, the decision was made, before we had nuclear submarines, that one person and one person alone could make the decision to initiate a nuclear holocaust, the President of the United States. That is not the situation we currently have. We have tactical submarines, and it seems like we have a particularly unsuited individual to be placed with that power. And I understand legislation has been introduced into Congress to take away the power from one individual, that it will require congressional action before we begin something of that magnitude. So I'm curious as to whether you're co-sponsors of that and just what you're going to do in general. Because I've got 4 kids, and I'm really scared.
Well, I think you're not alone in your apprehension, okay? Number one, we don't even have a war powers resolution that is justifying the extensive military action that's now taking place in Iraq and Syria and other parts of the Middle East. I believe that only Congress has the authority to declare war. I believe that Congress should have a debate and a vote on war powers, such as they will be. I'm a sponsor of war powers, of a bill that would require us to vote yes or no. And that would then allow us and you to know where I stand on Afghanistan, on Syria, and on Korea. Second, on this question of who has the authority, there's no question that if the United States is attacked, we're on the receiving end of an attack, then the Commander-in-Chief has the authority to take appropriate and immediate action that the Commander-in-Chief deems required to protect the safety of the American people. That's not the situation, that's one situation you could theoretically have in Korea, but the other is there's a lot of talk about a preemptive strike. I do not believe the president, any president, has the authority to have a preemptive strike on North Korea without authorization from Congress, and I would support legislation for that to happen. But the third thing, and this is what's the most alarming, because some of these questions in the hurly-burly of the moment, they're going to be tough calls. The bottom line is that if we're going to create a security structure that has the best prospects of keeping us safe and secure, we need to be reaching out to allies. We need to be developing constructive relationships with the world community. We need not to be telling people it's our way or the highway, because in those moments where you have to mobilize opinion, and the Iran nuclear deal is something that I was strongly and actively in support of, and it was something that only happened as a result of the cooperation that a couple of administrations were able to get, not only from our obvious allies, Great Britain, France, to name 2, but from Russia and China on the sanctions that made them effective. So if we are acting in these unilateral and bellicose ways and using the kind of rhetoric that just inflames things, it diminishes our ability to take the steps diplomatically that we need to be in a condition to make America as safe as we possibly can. So I was very disturbed by the president's speech. I was very disturbed by his rhetoric. In retrospect, you remember that speech by President Bush when we talked about the axis of evil? The total consensus among security folks is that that was a grave mistake, because it just shut down interaction and engagement rather than extended it. What do we have to fear if we talk to somebody? Talking to somebody doesn't mean you came in. It doesn't mean you agree with them, but it means you talk. So this is a very serious situation, and I do believe that Congress has to be much more actively engaged.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I share your concern as a mom, as a citizen, as a member of Congress. We need to step up and engage in it, but I also think this is an example of where this president, we're dealing with 2 different people, 2 different situations at the same time. You had the bellicose rhetoric, which I think was inappropriate, the name calling. I wouldn't let my sons do that when they were kids. We can't have the chief executive of the United States of America be name calling leaders of the free world. It's not appropriate. But what I think is appropriate is to engage our allies, use diplomatic channels and diplomatic means, use sanctions, and so then what happens later in the day today, they announce there are going to be increased sanctions. China's involved, I believe Russia's involved, our allies and the European nations are involved, and that's the way to increase the pressure and engage and use peaceful means. And I agree with Peter wholeheartedly on the Iran agreement. I mean, I think that was extraordinary to get to the place where we can wind down the capabilities of a country, the nuclear capabilities. It's going to require close monitoring. The implementation is important. But, and I don't want to speak for Peter, we have had a couple of classified briefings with the new administration. And although I can't get into the content of those discussions, I am comfortable telling you that I felt very much reassured by the caliber of the team that briefed us. So General Mattis was there, Rex Tillerson. I'm very concerned, I share Peter's concern about not making the appointments in the State Department and not having a robust, we have ambassadors that aren't even in place. So that's a serious concern to me, but I would say particularly with Secretary Mattis, and I think General Kelly plays an extraordinary role because this situation is unprecedented. We have a person that does not have, in my view, the capacity. He doesn't have the understanding. He doesn't have the global knowledge. And to be out there giving this belligerent speech, I think was a grave mistake. But I'm just saying the next step, I agree with the sanctions. And so I don't have a good solution for this. Congress needs to monitor it very, very closely. We need to engage. We need to assert the War Powers Act, and that you're absolutely right. No one can declare war without us. But it just, hopefully it's some reassurance to you that there are grown-ups in the vicinity.
Political environment. And I agree with you. It seems like the culture of bullying is really absolutely rife. And it's filtered down from the highest office. I think it's infected a lot of people. And I'm particularly concerned about police action these days. Not military action, but today in the Valley News we heard that there was a deaf person that was shot because shot and zapped, you know, and he's dead because he didn't hear the police say to stop. The day before, a rabbi from traveled through Vermont and was wrestled to the ground. His son was wrestled to the ground in both of them cuffs. And his wife called 911 because it was a, let's see, what's that word? Hasidic, yes. But the word I was looking for was, it was a terrorist action. The woman thought, even though it was the police. So in her mind, the police were terrorists. We can't have that if they're going to be. But the thing is that the police have been very active, and I wonder what we should be doing about that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really good question, and I meant to say at the top when we first started out that my heart goes out to everyone in the Upper Valley with the incident last week at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, the shooting, and then the incident down in Claremont and the alleged racial incident with the little boy Quincy. These are really challenging times, and we don't know, we don't have all the facts about these situations, but certainly Charlottesville, we know the way the president responded. The bullying, personally I think if Ivanka Trump is going to take on bullying, she should start closer to home. I think the tweet the other day with the golf ball was completely inappropriate, not just doesn't have the capacity. It's not appropriate. With regard to the police, I want to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, a former chief of our Supreme Court in New Hampshire, John Broderick. And he is starting what's hopefully turning into a national movement that he calls the 5 signs, and it's about mental health and how to recognize people in mental health distress. And it could be a member of your family or somebody in your community. But I think it's critically important that we do more training for police to understand mental health issues, disability, certainly deafness. Any person that is not going to respond to them in the way that they are expecting the response to be. I have a nephew who has a severe mental health issues. He has late onset schizophrenia, and he is 6'6", and he's, bless his heart, crazy. And we love him dearly, and he lives in a small town way out west. And but he has voices. He talks to himself, and luckily in that small community where my brother lives and where he lives, everybody knows him. And if he's walking down the road talking to himself, and they wave, Eric, how's it going? And he can manage. But I've learned a lot from this about if somebody is hearing voices, they're not going to be hearing directions about stop, lay down, stand back, whatever. And he's 6'6". Anybody is going to feel threatened by him. He's a gentle giant. So I think training, I don't know, Peter, if there's more, I think there are. I know there is money in our budget in the Department of Justice for training in this, but I think we need to increase it. And what John Broderick's doing is educating the whole community for all of us to recognize the 5 signs.
I agree with Annie. How do you de-escalate is the question, and that training can really help there. Being a police officer, incredibly hard job. We expect them to do everything, to get everything right. Most of the time, they're not in danger, but sometimes they are. So it's a very, very, very demanding job, and I think we've got to understand that. But training is respectful of the police, because there are skills that can be learned, and a lot of our police officers are they're street smart, and they'll figure it out. But let's support that effort.
Steve Usley from Norwich. I think we may all survive the ineptitude of Donald Trump, but I'm not so sure when we look at the news and we see what's happened in Houston and Florida with climate change taking place. I guess I'd like to understand what we're doing more in terms of solar and renewable energy, promoting that as a way to maybe alleviate some of the problems.
Well, first of all, you're right, okay? But here's the thing that mystifies me about our approach on climate change in Congress. We're like denying that it exists, right? And it's like Bob Dylan's got it right in the weather. Just take a look at which way the wind is blowing. These wild storms that come once every 500 years are coming every year. The weather, whether it's the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the torrential rains, the wildfires, all of that is really happening. The sea level rise, the temperature rise, all of these things are very detrimental. And the aspect of it that is striking to me is that a confident nation doesn't deny the existence of a problem, it faces them. And it's like a confident person doesn't deny they've got a problem, they face it and figure out how to address it. And it's in the actual addressing of the problem you start building an economy and start creating jobs. That's happening in Vermont, and I know in New Hampshire. But Margaret, Margaret was in the legislature and was really incredibly aggressive on doing clean energy policies. And our clean energy sector has taken off, as you know, Steve, in Vermont. And what you're finding, is despite the head in the sand approach we're taking in DC, is that a lot of our local entrepreneurs, a lot of our local superintendents are taking a look at their building and how can we tighten it up. A lot of our companies are seeing there's market opportunity. Some of our utilities, like in Vermont, Green Mountain Power is very aggressive in trying to do things to change the whole business model so that you use less energy, but you can make it work. So things are happening at the local level. There's a lot of denial in Congress. Now I want to just talk very briefly about that, because some of that denial is not real denial of the science. It's a fear of facing the disruption that is part of changing from a carbon-based economy to a clean energy economy. And those of us who are strongly in favor of clean energy have to understand and acknowledge that this is pain in some places like coal country. You know, I went to a coal mine with a colleague of mine on the Energy and Commerce Committee and went into this in West Virginia. Went down 1,000 feet and 4.5 miles in one of those little coal cars, incredibly dark, and spent 4 hours down there with the coal miners. And we came out and had a meal. And number one, the only people I've ever met who work as hard as the coal miners are the Vermont dairy farmers. Number two, I acknowledge that we don't have any coal in Vermont, but we do have electricity, and they kept the lights on for us for 100 years. Number three, these folks are proud of the work they do. This is hard, hard work. And many of the families, they're in their 2 and 3 and 4 generations. And when we were having a lunch around with all these coal miners, it was a Friday, I asked them what they're doing that night. In that coal country, they go to Friday night football games. Well, 12 years ago, there was like 8 high schools. Now there's only 3. There's a lot more opioid, okay? But the point here is that those of us, so there's some members of Congress, and they represent those counties. And their concern about jobs and the economy, I believe, is valid, all right? The future's not going to be in coal. Those jobs are declining because of market forces and a lot of other things. It's not because of the EPA. But I do believe this. I believe that all of us who've benefited by the work they've done, had the lights on, our factories running, and who know that we do need to go to a clean energy economy, we have to be all in helping those folks make that transition to that clean economy and come with us. That is our obligation. We have the burden of that advocacy.
I just want to speak to a glimmer of hope in Congress on this topic. We do have a bipartisan group that is growing, and there are more and more of our Republican colleagues that concur with us about the renewable energy economy. It's a win-win-win. It's, you know, we can create jobs, we can be less dependent upon foreign oil, and we can save our planet. And so Vermont's led the way in terms of solar. Dwayne Peterson is a good friend of mine that works in the big solar company, and we are catching up in New Hampshire. Our solar is increasing. We've got a lot of hydro. We have bioenergy here. Big bioenergy plant in my district up in Berlin, New Hampshire, that helped to bring back the jobs when we lost a dozen paper mills. And we can have the whole wood basket of jobs, of loggers and truckers and all of that come back to that region. I want to tell you a quick story. I went to a renewable energy conference in August with 22 members of Congress, a mix of Republicans and Democrats. And coincidentally, I sat for 5 days next to a guy named Joe Barton, who is our colleague, who is Mr. Oil. He represents Houston, and he was the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. He is in Congress to represent oil. That is what he's there for, and I agree with Peter on the jobs. We can't deny it. We've got to be smart and help them make this transition with us. And there was a moment, we were hearing all these speakers, international speakers, on the benefits of renewable energy, including, by the way, the international CEO of Shell Oil, who was there to talk to us about their investments in solar and wind. And lots and lots of companies and lots of other institutions, colleges, the military, major institutions making big economic decisions in our life are moving forward. They don't care what the president or Congress thinks. They realize that their head is in the sand, and they're moving on. Fleets of vehicles. So anyway, what Joe Barton said partway through this conference, he turned to us and he said, I don't disagree that the climate is changing, which I thought was a big step because I'm pretty sure he did disagree that the climate was changing. But then he said, I just disagree about what's causing it. So I listened for a couple more days to the experts, and at the end of the conference, I turned to him and I said, you know, Joe, we don't know who's right, you or me. I said, I don't know if it's 80-20 or 20-80. What I know is what I can make a difference in. Human beings can decide to capture carbon, not release it into our environment, not make this situation worse, and, oh, by the way, create more jobs and become less dependent. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm going to guess it's 80-20. In other words, man-made, and we can do something about it. But I said, I'll grant you this. For the other 20%, I'll pray with you. And he just laughed. I mean, you know, what's the point in not trying to fix it?
Thank you very much. Matthew Good, also from Cornell. What I'd like to do first is thank you both for your references to bipartisanship. Thank you for being here. One of the things that you said, Peter, was alluded to the aspirational hope that people put in their government and want to sacrifice for their government. And it's the spirit today, and I think about my daughter and hopeful for her future participation in the democratic process. The climate today, and I'm glad that you mentioned the tragic incident in Claremont, and thank you. What is it? What is your opinion on why we're having such a hard time getting to the place that we want to aspire to? Getting things done for people. Congress, I'm speaking specifically of bipartisanship. We haven't had regular order for as long as any child who's in this school would have been alive. So is it Citizens United? Is it the primary system? What is it that needs to change in order for us to make progress on that front?
You want to take the easy question? You know what? My view on this is that there is an enormous stress and transition that this country and the world is going in with the economy. And it's very disruptive. And what's happened along the way is that institutions have lost a lot of credibility. And what I said in the very beginning, that as individualistic as we are, as self-reliant as we want to be, part of personal responsibility is investing in the creation and improvement of institutions to carry on the work that has to be done. Institutions don't have that credibility. Then you add to it what's happened in politics with Citizens United. You know, when I first ran for Congress, Martha Rainville and I, she was a Republican candidate, really good candidate, we made an agreement. We wouldn't run a negative ad, she against me or me against her. We were the only contested congressional race in the entire country that didn't run a negative ad, okay? We couldn't do that now because Citizens United means some wacky billionaire, you know, in pick your state, in Idaho, Montana, whatever, decides they're looking at their map with their political advisor saying, we got a shot at picking up Vermont, all right? They don't care about you. They don't care about Andy Kuster or me, but they see opportunity. And I can stop that person from pouring millions of dollars into that race with whatever messages they want, where you're disgusted by what those messages are and assume that the candidate must have something to do with it. So Citizens United is bad. Gerrymandering in our districts is really, really bad. Because what's happened is these boutique districts where it's designed for the benefit of a super conservative Republican or super liberal Democrat means that the people that get elected are only worried about maintaining their capacity to win in the primary and not broadly represent everybody that's in their district. That's really, really bad. So politically, Citizens United, toxic. Gerrymandering, toxic. Two things that we could do, be tough in this Congress, would be to deal with the money. I mean, that decision by the Supreme Court is going to live in infamy, along with the Dred Scott decision, all right? Terrible for democracy. And so those are big challenges. But bottom line, I'm more and more convinced that while we try to find our way in DC, it's so essential that people in local communities, in local businesses, hang in, because there is a sense of community that we all have to revive and restore and nurture. And people don't have a sense that Washington understands that or cares about it. And the deeply constructive things and relationships that we have in our life are local. And we get involved in national debates, but what we really care about are those interactions we have with people at work. And we want to treat them right and be treated right. People in our family, obviously, but the people in our community. So local leadership is more important than ever to get us through what I think is a very tough time.
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, certainly Peter and I are doing our best to reach across the aisle and to get to know people. I'm sure Peter goes to the gym, and I have lots of relationships with both male and female colleagues. We get together, we have dinner, we care about each other, their children, they're one of my very close friends. I don't think I ever vote with her. I mean, she's a very far right-wing Republican. And she and I are fond of each other, and we try to find ways on the Veterans Committee where we can work together, or in agriculture where it's more regional, it's not so much just straight up partisanship. But I will say, having been on the receiving end, 2014, the Koch brothers spent $4 million against me in my election. But here's the hopeful point, which is that it was the grassroots that defeated them by 10 percentage points. It wasn't insignificant. And it was the voter that can overcome in that situation. I promised I wouldn't talk about politics, but I couldn't tell the story without it. So we're going to take one more, so you get the last word, sir.
Thank you very much, and in a way I feel like I'm representing almost everyone in this room. I'm Alan Reeds with the Hanover Co-op Food Stores. We have stores on both sides of the river, and probably most of you are members. I do want to thank you both for your work, and I hope you'll consider becoming part of the Congressional Business Caucus, which is doing great work to use cooperation as a business model to solve problems, what you just said about small local businesses. And with that in mind, we represent about 24,000 members and lots of small businesses. And so for me, your work on ag and agriculture issues, I know that I'm not alone in that concern for small farms, the dairy pricing. Is there any hope that, the small farmers took a hit with the Food Safety Modernization Act, being asked to comply with regulations that were to solve problems that corporate ag was causing and sweeping under the rug. So I hope the many bigger issues than we might think ag issues might be, please, this is significant stuff. So is there hope that this can bubble up with a bipartisan solution? And again, that congressional cooperative business caucus is important.
Excellent, and thank you for that, and thank you for your great business. We've done some events there about healthy food. I did a series of roundtables. We're coming up on the Farm Bill this winter, and I did a series of roundtables, and I welcomed the farmers and the eaters. So that's my new approach to my role on the Agriculture Committee. I should say, I took Peter's New England spot when he went to Energy and Commerce, which for all of you in Vermont, that's a really significant role for him to have, and we're really proud of him on all of the healthcare, all the renewable energy and everything. So I'm trying to fill his big shoes on ag. Let me tell you a quick story about ag. I am the first person in 70 years to represent New Hampshire on that committee. And what that is significant, that is how far our agricultural policy swung to the big agribusiness in the Midwest. And so we are slowly, step by step, taking back our agriculture policy for the small family farms and the healthy eaters. And particularly with regard to SIFMA, FISMA. There's one issue in Congress that's called SIFMA and one that's called FISMA. This is FISMA. The Food Safety Modernization Act. We actually convened a hearing up here. We had 200 people show up. We brought the regulators up here and we said, your rules and regulations are not working for small family farms. You're drafting these, this was during the last administration, you're drafting these thinking that we're all doing this big agribusiness. Well, I can say, I went through my first farm bill, we had some big successes for farm to table, farmers markets, healthy nutrition, growing healthy food and selling healthy food. But what I'm really excited about at this upcoming farm bill, now I'm an even more adamant advocate because my husband and I just finished this. It's called Whole 30, but you go for 30 days, no sugar, no grain, no dairy, no alcohol. We made it, and we're still talking to each other. We're actually still eating pretty much that way, but what I learned is how much sugar has gone into the American food system and into our diet. And you look at the public health consequences of diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. These are all the chronic illnesses that are the leading cost drivers. And oh, by the way, people don't feel well with obesity and all the rest. So I'm going to go into this next farm bill with a vengeance. It's going to start this winter. I'm happy to hear from any of you with your thoughts and ideas. And just one last comment, I'm going to turn over to Peter for his final words. It is one of the great opportunities because it's not partisan, it's regional. And so we can make have our organic members on the committee, that they're R's and D's working together, and we can have our small family farmers and our farmers markets. And one of the things we did, you can get a 2-for-1 for food stamps at the farmers market and try to, just boost nutrition, school nutrition, but nutrition all across the society. It's the cornerstone of being healthy and free. So, here.
Thank you, and good luck on that. I mean, I'll end with a little bit of a story of one bipartisan success. It's a cheese story. But first of all, I want to say, on local nutrition and on the environment, it's young people that are leading the way. They just get it. And it's not just about the health benefits Andy was talking about. All of that production is local. And what our agricultural folks know, we've got Jody here who's been doing it for years, if we take care of the land will take care of us. And the more we can do that locally, the fewer some of these big bad inputs are, the healthier the food. And it keeps the money circulating. And those of us who don't farm but benefit by good food and local farms are the beneficiaries of the landscape as well. So it's a really big deal. And good luck in whatever instructions you give me on the farm bill. The answer is yes, okay? But I have one funny story, and it goes to your regulation. I got this panic call from Jasper Hill Farms. And the brothers, the Keeler brothers, are from Pomfret, and they're now up in Greensboro. And they have this incredible cheese-making operation that sells in the co-op and all around the world, and they've won awards around the world. And the panic was, they did something with Cabot where they have literally 25 miles worth of cheese boards, where they're curing their cheese and cheese for Cabot and others. And there was a regulation coming out of the Agriculture Department to prohibit the use of wood for aging cheese. This is like a problem, right? And the reason it happened was because there was some operation that was really contaminated in upstate New York. They came in and decided, and it was contaminated, they decided they were going to ban wood. So I called up the Ag Department, I said, look, this is an issue about wood or plastic or metal. This is a situation of really unsanitary conditions that ought to be shut down. So they gave me the runaround, and I said, I've got to find a move here, you know. So who do I think of? Wisconsin, Paul Ryan, right? So we set everything up. It's down. I make all the calls. I get everything ready, and I go down to Paul, and suddenly he's on the floor. And I said, Paul. He said, what? And I've known him for a while since I first got there. I said, Paul, we've got us a cheese problem. So I got his attention. So then he and I went to the cloakroom, and we called up the ag department, and we were about to be doing the budget. This is before he was speaker, but he was the budget, the chair of the budget committee. So we explained to the powers that be over the ag department, if we had a cheese problem, they had a budget problem. So the right prevailed in that case. So anyway, all is not lost.
I do want to thank you all for being so respectful, and there are probably lots more questions, so I'm just going to say you can reach either one of us at mail.house.gov, and Peter, I'm sure, has a website under Peter Welch. I have a website under Annie Kuster. Please be in touch with us. If you come to Washington, please be in touch. We'd love to sit and talk with you. Our wonderful interns will give you a fabulous tour of the Capitol, and otherwise we would be happy to see you around here when we're at home. And I think the conclusion is that I'm very fortunate to have such a great mentor, and you can consider yourselves fortunate to have 2 members of Congress next time you want to influence us.